All right. Got a nice quote down here from Carl Jung. All right, this is the figure that he referenced in our book, In the Road to Orion, that supports the Isis Thesis. Back to where we were, but for a short moment, take a look at figure 8-1. Get a glimpse. There's a page, and we're going. A virus is an infectious particle composed of a protein capsid and nucleic acid core, essentially DNA or RNA, which depends on the host organism for replication. Its DNA or double-stranded copy of RNA genome integrates into the host chromosome during lysogenic infection or replicates during the lytic cycle. Viruses attack eukaryotic cells types, causing disease in humans. In contrast, bacterial viruses or bacteriophage, essentially eaters or bacterias, attack bacteria, not humans. Keeping this distinction in mind, we have already established that the sun god Ra points to hydrogen, other energetic particles in phage lambda. Now we can add that the sun god beetle Ra also operates similar to a bacteriophage. So now we have sun god and sun beetle equal high energy particles in phage lambda. Beetle's dung ball equals prokaryotic cell or earth. Phage lambda. We can easily set up an analogy with the Egyptian conception of the beetle with the dung ball. If the creator god Khepera, aka Atum Re, is a beetle laying its eggs in dung, then the beetle is phage lambda inserting its DNA into the E. coli host cell. This expansion on the Egyptian model seems believable in the light of the fact that the lambda decision circuit includes 12 gates, suggesting the Egyptian rationale for the title of their book of gates, which has 12 gates similar to the Amduat's 12 hours on divisions. We will investigate the lambda decision circuit in these supportive texts in part 3. The lambda genome is 48.5 kb long, encoding some 46 genes, which can synthesize about 55 proteins. In the tail phage, the genome is encapsulated in an icosahedral head or a protein shell called a capsid. The subunits of the capsid are located at the vertices or face of the icosahedron. An icosahedron has 20 equilateral triangles arranged around the face of a sphere. As discussed, the Egyptian pyramid reflects the same basic triangular design found in phage lambda. In its exogenous form, phage lambda is linear with the short complementary 12 base pair, which we'll call BP for short, single-stranded, which we'll call SS regions. When lambda DNA infects an E. coli cell, it circularizes the cohesive 12 BP ends, connecting, and then the phage decides on one of the two different strategies, the lytic cycle or the lysogenic cycle. In the virulent lytic cycle, the phage reproduces in the host E. coli via rolling circle replication and are normally released when the cell lyses or bursts. In contrast, the lysogenic cycle does not destroy the host cell. The lambda DNA replicates with the host cell, the lysogen, remaining dormant in the prophage state. Bacteria viruses like temperate phage lambda exploit the intracellular host cell pathway for their reproduction. Another way of explaining this process is to consider the bacteriophage as a cell invader taking over the bacterial cell reproduction machinery so that it can produce its own phage progeny. When the phage destroys the bacteria cell during reproduction, this is the lifestyle of the lysid or the lytic pathway. When the phage resides in the host cell DNA like a quiet parasite, this is the lifestyle of the lysogeny or the lysogenic pathway. The host cell is called the lysogen, and the quiet phage is called the prophage or the prophage. Because of the prophage or prophage inserts into the break in the host chromosome between the BGAL and bio operons, the bacterium reproduces the DNA of the silent phage invader with its own DNA, passing the hybrid or recombinant DNA on each generation. The process can be compared to the idea of the world as a hologram that enfolds the whole image or sleeping lambda genome in each of its parts. Recent research shows the human genome may have originally been viral, suggesting the potential for lysogenic infection. Now let's look again at the 312 BCE papyrus text about the creator god Khepera, symbolized by the coprophagy beetle. From our new perspective of the Egyptian-based model, a sun or star represents a phage lambda source, and the Earth and its magnetosphere represents a rod-shaped gram-negative to bacteria cell, such as E. coli. The meaning of Khepera is to roll, suggesting the rolling circle replication of the lambda-lytic cycle. Khepera, or the beetle rolling the dung in circular form, suggests the circularization of lambda DNA, which occurs inside the host E. coli cell. Also, Khepera raises the creation from the inactive state, suggesting the rising of excision of the lambda prophage. Additional language points to the excision of the prophage. May the eye of the horse belong to you, the reversion of the God's offering. Pyramid text 199. Excision can be considered reversion because when the lambda prophage exercises its reverse, the integration pathway of or leaves the cell by the pathway it uses to enter the prophage site. Bacteria geneticists call this site-specific recombination, so we can decode these signs as follows. Title of the Book of Gates equals 12 gates of lambda decision circuit. Meaning of Khepera, to roll, equals rolling circle replication. Dung in circular form equals circularization of DNA in host cell. Raising creation from a state of inactivity, excision of prophage. Reversion of the gods of offering equal excision of prophage. All right. That's what we are. That's a glimpse of that page. Boom. In order to test the validity of our lambda E. coli model, we need to determine the significance of Osiris, along with discovering how the deceased restores the Eye of Horus, the first eye, and Osiris. A major goal in the Amduat is re-establishing the first eye of Horus and the gods who were with Osiris when he came into being the first time, a reference to the first Ennead of 9 gods at the origin of time, or the emergence of the first cell. Likewise, the Egyptian ideogram of an eye means I, see, actions of I, and if we decipher I as cell, then the activity of the eye or cell is DNA transcription, replication, and the translation to protein. This highlights the creative power of the sun and stars of first eye of Horus, showing that the Horus lineage is solar or cosmic, having an upper Egyptian origin like Osiris. Relative to the etymology of the name Osiris, J. Gwyn Giddith, professor of classic and Egyptology, University of Wales, notes that the gods of the Ser were written with the throne sign, followed by the eye sign, but later inverted. Many meanings are suggest, such as he who takes his seat or throne, the place of creation, seat of eye, with the eye explained as the sun, the seats that creates. The creative seat of I suggests the activity of creation at the gene seat, which is solar DNA transcription, replication, and translation. Lambda, rolling circle, replication. This takes place with the excision of the lambda prefix from the gene seat between Begal and the bio-operons. So it may be that Osiris, who is always shown mummified with a close linkage of the legs that suggests a phage tail, represents the prophet. In line with this idea, Coffin Text 53 urges the deceased to wake to life, and Faulkner translates one passage as, "Rise, rise in the morning now that you are a mummy." However, in a footnote to this passage, he notes a variation. "You are in your mummy shape." Being in the mummy shape suggests phage morphology. Other evidence for this view includes the numerous drawings in the funerary texts of reclining mummies with the enclosure, the textual language describing inertness and sleep, and the entire concept of the rising Osiris in the realm of the dead. That is, the exercising lambda prophet. Likewise, an examination of the Amduat in the Book of Gates in Part 3 of this work offers further support for this possibility. If Osiris is the lambda prophet, then the E. coli host or lysogen not only reproduces its own DNA, but also that of the prophet lodged within it. This suggests that the human life developed from the transition of the first prokaryotic to our eukaryotic cell type, with the viral heritage of the lambda prophet dormant in each cell. Then a human death, an option exists for excision of the original prophet by means of the lytic lifestyle through a horizontal gene transfer via lambda vector into and out of a whole cell. On the macrocosmic scale, this would represent a movement of one's consciousness, or as Goff would say, ones and multiple part out of the magnetosphere to the stars. Research on the human genome shows that due to viral gene insertion events, genetic material from inactive viruses accounts for roughly 3% of the human genome. Hundreds of other genes encoding at least 223 proteins seem to have come from bacteria. One researcher said that parts of the genome were reverse transcribed with a few genes mixed in. To be specific, in reverse transcription, the endo cleaves between the adenine and the thymine in the bottom strand of the DNA, proceeding in the 5 to 3 direction in the upside down and right to left orientation. As discussed from the afterlife view of the deceased, this process would be left to right orientation. That was not up down and backwards. As mentioned, a similar parallel to this resident prophet is a hologram enfolding the whole image in each of its parts. So if the picture were cut into pieces, each piece would contain the whole. Human DNA in its prokaryotic to eukaryotic transition still has viral and bacterial components. The pharaohs are suggesting that human death results in a return to the quantum world and origin of time, where horizontal gene transfer is possible through the induction of a lambda prophet in the first prokaryotic cell, and could say that the lysogenic lifestyle allows the sleeping lambda, that is Osiris, to reside within each living being. On the other hand, a human death opens up the lifestyle option if the deceased has knowledge of the path or two routes of Re Atum. Rather, I meant to say, or the two routes of Re Atum. An afterlife cloning experiment. Ooh, got a little dirty up in there. Our model posits that the deceased represents a genetic insert into a bacteriophage vector. In this capacity, he is ready to make this transformation in the duat and has bonded to Ra at the polar great stairway to be ferried through the black duat as the deceased sun god and Osiris. Since our exploration supports our model that the sun god Ra operates like incoming phage lambda into the E. coli Earth, for simplicity, we can say that the union of the sun god Ra and the deceased could represent the uptake of human information or genetic instructions, that is, fragmented DNA into the incoming lambda sun god. This is similar to types of horizontal gene transfer, how modern bacteria geneticists also call transformation and transduction. Today, researchers use bacteriophage viruses like phage lambda as cloning vectors. Put simply, they insert exogenous DNA fragments into the lambda genome. The phage then becomes a carrier molecule or vector and transfers or ferries the recombinant DNA into the host cell. For example, in the insertion vector lambda, the DNA fragment inserts into the ERO-RI or ECO-RI site lying within the CI gene, lambda CI repressor. This on a mutant strain of E. coli that produces lysins. This means the mutant strain CI gene is active. Any phage encoding a functional CI repressor which from lysogen on these hosts. When a DNA fragment is inserted into lambda GT10 vector at the CI gene, the gene is inactivated and only recombinant. D will forms plaques, or CI will form plaques. Okay. It seems as if the pharaoh understood their afterlife as a secret cloning experiment, for the kings and nobilities did their best to prevent the plebs or the common folk from having the knowledge. Keeping knowledge secret from the masses was a method of screening human DNA. With this knowledge, the kings and nobilities possessed directions and guidelines, such as going to the polar cusp of the earth to meet Ra for transformation. That screened out most of the population. It screened out most of the population. On the cellular level, this translates to directions indicating the polar cat, or gap between the cytoplasm and the cell wall, where the dynamic polar localization of proteins critical for cell division and cell cycle control exists in bacteria. By being this enriched protein localization area or origin for replication, the genetic heritage of DNA or genetic heritage or DNA of the deceased, that is, of the kings and nobilities, may have transformed into different products than if the deceased had been at any other location in the Earth's cell. For instance, in the afterlife, floating around the Earth's equator, a different location than the polar cusp may result in an elemental recycling of your hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen back to our upside down human world, just what the knowing Marquis de Sade predicted. Nonetheless, it may be possible that by providing knowledge to only a select few, the pharaoh were screening human beings and manipulating genes in their quantum afterlife. In light of the foregoing possibilities, let's identify the deceased as an inert at the CI gene in the lambda cloning vector or sun god. Such an inert inactives the lambda CI repressor that remains the lysogenic. So now we have decoded the deceased equals human genetic insert at CI gene and lambda vector. So you know the CI is the side that lies dormant, I believe. We gotta go back and check that. And just stays in your cell and reproduces, but neither here nor there. However, we must remember the pharaohs viewed the deceased as Osiris, for the earlier evidence equates that the deceased pharaoh with Osiris is with the Osiris. We have identified Osiris as representative of Lambda Prophet, the deceased as a genetic insert within the incoming sun god, Ra, who now becomes a lambda vector that ferries the human genetic insert through the duat or through the prokaryotic cell to the prophet's site. This results in rolling circle replication, the excision of the prophet Osiris, and the transformation or transduction of the deceased into the recombinant species. The deceased becomes Osiris when he bonds to the sun god and crew at the polar quarter. We could say that the Trinity of the deceased, the sun god, and Osiris all representatives of phage lambda, or the firstborn DNA of Atum, and the sun and stars. The deceased receives the eye of Horus, which the winds bring to you for your nose. The lambda trinity is the eye of Horus, which is not only the incoming recombinant DNA of the sun god and deceased, but also the lambda genome or prophets, Osiris large in the chromosome. So now we have decoded eye of Horus equals lambda genome prophets, Osiris incoming sun god. Close to the page. Boom, boom. Get the other page. Boom, boom. Yet, if Osiris is the lambda prophet, then what does the wall of the double Osiris represent in the tomb of Ramses VI? The scene depicts two identical Osirises back to back on two thrones. Sometime in phage lambda, a double lysogen forms in specialized transductions, what geneticists call a dilysogen. So it seems the pharaohs were aware of the lambda dilysogen, or the phenotype of a strain that contained two lambda prophages. So decoded, we have double Osiris equals double lysogen or dilysogen. All right, quick look at the page. When we look at the Eye of Horus, long chapter, y'all. The Eye of Horus. Idea strand 4256. King's strength is Eye of Horus, Eye of Great Lady. Idea strand 56, 70, 72, 76, 77. King bears complete Eye of Horus. Idea strand 68, 71, 72, 76, 83. Eye of Horus will not fail to Seth. King takes eye from Seth. Idea strand 70. King rules mounds of Seth and mounds of Horus. Idea strand 76 and 77. Eye of Horus is whole. Idea strand 59, 60, and 83. King unites two lands when Eye awakes. Heads two conclaves has sole possession of Eye. Idea strand 94. King's bright cloak in Eye of Horus. And idea strand 100. King absorbs Eye of Horus, swallows intelligence of gods. In light of our decoded signs and to gain better understanding of Osiris, a review of texts related to the Eye of Horus. A central theme is helpful. Horus, a sky god and sun god, is one of the earliest major Egyptian deities, as early as the late pre-dynastic period. The falcon hieroglyph is used in the name of the god, Heru, meaning the distant one. The most common genealogy portrays Horus as the son of Osiris and Isis, making a tenth of the family tree of the Heliopolitan Ennead. The god of origins is Re-Atum, the sun god, who is also synchronized with Re Harakati, meaning Ra is Horus of the horizon. The deceased goes to the sacred portal from which Atum proceeded, where Hu and Seer are present with Atum. So we are back at the beginning of creation, the origin of time, a period following Atum's creation of the foundation of forms and elements of the first DNA of phage lambda. The deceased states that he restores the eye that was injured when the rivals fought, suggesting that lambda DNA has been damaged. The text goes to explain that the rivals are Horus and Seth, the gods of confusion and disorder. Seth wounds the face of Horus, who loses the light of his right eye. And Horus carries off the testicles of Seth. Horus's right eye is the sun, his left eye is the moon. In another version of the account, Seth is the form of a black boar, tears out the swallows, the moon eye of Horus. The Egyptian account suggests that at one time, most likely the beginning of creation of matter, the eye of Horus, or the Ujat, whole one, was complete before fission. When the eye became injured, we could say that matter creation occurred, causing it to fission in nuclei, for it was no longer whole. According to the funerary text, upon human death, the deceased returns to the dwarf world of Atum, restoring the eye of Horus that Seth damaged. Thus, the deceased becomes the fiery eye of Horus. The whole eye, the Wijat. Now, are we to make sense of this story? How are we to make sense of this story? To understand the meaning of signs related to the eye of Horus, a review of the pyramid text, the least corrupted evidence is helpful. In these texts, the rebellious Seth is overcome by Horus, and Horus takes back the eye. Seth snatched the two eyes of Horus are called the black eye, left, and the white eye, right. The deceased king is offered the eye that was wrested from Seth. However, both eyes are brought to the king as an offering, for Horus as victor has united them to you, for they are complete. In other words, because Horus overcomes Seth, the injured eye reverts back to Horus. This eye of Horus is the great left eye in a healed condition. It is worthy to note that in the study of mutation, reversion is when the phenotype of a mutant can be reverted to the original parental phenotype by a second mutation. The reversion occurs due to the second mutation within the gene or at another locus. True reversion occurs when the mutated base pair is converted back to the original base pair and the function of the translation to protein is restored. This idea of reversion is mentioned to the deceased. May the eye of Horus belong to you, the reversion of the king's offering. So the whole eye of Horus, or Ujaret, is comprised of both eyes, the restored left black moon eye and the right white sun eye, according to the text. Seth's death was a crime because he snatched the eye. Osiris died. Both eyes must be united to Osiris in order to expand his heart so that he can live. Based on these textual references, we can expand our possibilities as follows. Sun God Ra equals incoming phage lambda. Return of deceased to Atum, Hu, and Seer equals movement to foundation of forms, origin of time, or Atum's lambda DNA before humans. Osiris dies. Seth injury to eye of Horus equals matter/human creation from lambda genome. Osiris lives. Horus overcomes Seth, takes back Eye, making the Eye of Horus whole, equals mutated base pair is converted back to original base pair, and the function of the translation to protein is restored. All right, quick glimpse at that. Boom, that whole page again. We're gonna do this page, we'll do that. Let's keep it moving, y'all. Because the pharaohs used a maze of meta symbols. Because the pharaohs used more than one meta symbol to identify the same idea, let's review the interconnected metaphors related to the Eye of Horus so we can make sense out of the text. At this point, a deductive compilation of the interconnected groups of meta symbols from the pyramid and coffin text describing Seth and his eye, Horus and his eye, and the whole eye of the rivals Seth and Horus result in our next matrix. And again, let's put that matrix. Boom. Boom. Okay, we got a whole thing together now, y'all. A review of idea strands 62 to 76 informs us of the following ideas. The full function of the Eye of Horus is necessary for the king to speak the great word, which results in the Horus lineage or the reborn deceased king as Osiris. We can see that the repression of Seth or the human lineage results in the activation of Horus or celestial lineage and vice versa. This means that when Seth is active, Horus is inert, and when Horus is active, Seth is beheaded and his power over the head of the Eye of Horus destroyed. Again, Osiris equals deceased king, recombinant DNA equals Eye of Horus, Horus equals lambda genome. So all that equals the same thing again. Osiris equals deceased king equals recombinant DNA equals Eye of Horus equals lambda genome. From a bacteria genetic point of view, one might say that when the Seth eye is replicating humans, the Horus eye survives silently as part of the host chromosome into a state of lysergy. In contrast, when the Eye of Horus is victorious, the Lysid cycle rules. Thus, Seth and his gang are beheaded or destroyed, and Horus produces progeny, and Osiris breaks out of the lysergy. If one were to compare the competition of Seth and Horus with a particle bacteriophage, the virus life cycle of temperate phage lambda, a genetic control system involved in the action of repressor proteins regulating lysergy versus lytic replication, would be a likely candidate. In Matrix 4, we posit that the Eye of Horus is the field of offering, also describing the 7 portions of bread or 7 urae. This compares to the left and right arm of the lambda genome when its 7 operons in the control lysergy and lysis and its support a developing equation that the Eye of Horus is the lambda genome lodged on the house chromosome, that is, the prophet Osiris. In the Book of the Dead, the 7 cows who give bread and beer represent the field of offerings, or the 7 lambda operons. Supporting evidence for this idea that the pharaohs were explaining the operation of lambda lifestyles are narrative meta-symbols relating to 3 events. The battle between Seth and Horus in the Island of Fire, as the battle between CI or C1 and the crow proteins determining Lysengy or versus lysis. Number 2, the death of fire or self snatching the eye as CI protein occupying the right operator site first. The ascendancy of the right arm of Horus over Seth as crow protein dominating the right operator sequence first. Before investigating these 3 pivotal events, let's explore supporting Egyptian concepts, beginning with the geometry of the Eye of Horus. The geometry of the Ukiah. The geometry of the Ukiah. Sir Alan Gardiner, Egyptian grammar, in 1927 describes the ancient Egyptian fraction used to divide the hekat unit or the gallon: 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32, and 1/64. This mathematical pattern suggests the process of DNA replicating into 2 daughter cells, each retaining 1/2 of the original sense DNA strand, which gradually diminishes the original DNA. Yet this mathematical progression also represents the radioactive decay series. The statistics governing radioactive decay predict the decay pattern of a large number of radioactive nuclei. The decay constant is closely related to the half-life, which is the time it takes for half of the material to decay. After 2 half-lives, there will be 1/4 of the original sample. After 3 half-lives, 1/8, and so on. So the decay series of 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32, and 1/64 is a good fit for the 6 fractions of the Eye of Horus, corresponding to the sense data, which appears to be vanishing. By calculus, the fractions of the eye add up to 1, suggesting the wholeness. So we could say that the whole eye connotes no DNA replication and no decay, but the injured eye results in both DNA replication and DNA. Okay, so now we have Eye of Horus geometry equals DNA replication, radioactive decay series. Whole eye, or 1, equals no DNA replication, no DNA. As mentioned, the funerary text portrayed the deceased in the afterlife as the conscious during the process of radioactive decay, that almost regresses to the 0 point, which is the change in potential which has physical significance. In hyperphysics, for a single point charge or localized collection of charges, it is logical to set the 0 point at infinity. In essence, the Eye of Horus, Atum, Re, Atum, and so on, becomes a medium for transformation that restores the eye, corrects the mass defect in the nucleus of the atom by making it whole again, and brings the deceased face to face with the foundation of forms in the tomb's heart, that is, the lambda DNA. This entire process is a movement towards the 0 point or infinity. This is movement toward the 0 point. The Eye of Horus series relates to the gravitational force. According to Hawkins, in three dimensions, the gravitational force drops to 1/4 if one doubles the distance between 2 bodies. In the 4th dimension, it drops to 1/8 in 5 dimensions, to 1/16 in 6 dimensions, to 132nd and in 7 dimensions to 164th. This situation will make Earth very unstable in its orbit around the Sun, causing it to spiral into the Sun, which would either fall apart or collapse to form a black hole. So the Eye of Horus could represent the decrease of the gravitational force between two bodies due to low dimensionality. Also, curved black holes have a gyromagnetic ratio 2 or spin or negative half, along with natural Griffith algebra geometry that deals with the same series of numbers 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. Clifford algebras relate to vector spaces, their rotations, their spinors, in the movement to the 0-point field, or ZPF. Quantum fluctuations led to the kind of jittery motion at low energies. This minimum energy due to these quantum fluctuations is called a 0-point energy, BG. Sikhoff, butchered the man's name, states that the curvature of a quantum mechanical black hole is generated by these fluctuations. His model of the quantum mechanical black hole, or QMBH, described the most fundamental particles, which are leptons and quarks, of course. In terms of Kerr-Newman, a particle referred to as Compton radius vortex, and its Compton wavelength is its spread in location. In quantum mechanics, one can only calculate the probability of where a particle will be found. Yet a Compton radius vortex can have left-handed or right-handed helicity. Relative to Sifhart's model, the deceased with 180-degree flip or left-to-right orientation and west-to-east movement would be a left-handed helicity, Compton radius vortex, having an outer and inner event horizon that merge, becoming full complex dimensional space-time. In fact, the deceased, the sun god, and the earth cell may all be vortices in the quantum world. So the Eye of Horus fractions may relate to the gravity 0-point energy and the formation of the QMBHs, significantly those with left-handed helicity. Finally, the long spiral from the pupil of the Eye of Horus is a mirror image of the Fibonacci spiral, or geometric spiral, whose growth is regulated by a series of numbers indicating exponential growth. The Fibonacci series converges on phi, which is also related to the icosahedron, the pentagon, and DNA. Any number in the series after 1 is equal to the sum of the two preceding numbers. Adjacent numbers approximate the golden ratio. So we could easily identify this series of numbers with the exponential growth of human and other species in nature. So right now we have Objective 5 completed. Matrix is centered on the idea that the Egyptian afterlife exists on the quantum cellular level and is based on phage lambda genetics. Therefore, it supports our initial model in Matrix 2, which continues to have coherence. This brings us face to face with 21st century molecular biology, bacteria genetics. the supramolecular chemistry, the scientific ground foreshadowed by the complicated Amduat and the Book of Gate that support the Egyptian idea of life after death. So, for ease of understanding, and before we discover how the deceased restores the eye of Horus, the next chapter provides a brief review of bacterial genetics. Yo, so this is a heavy chapter, so yo, we gotta study. Alright? Thick one. Appreciate y'all. You heard?